So in C, a string is really just an array of characters. We don't really have any sort of data type associated with a string. We just use character arrays to represent them. So there's two different ways that we can really declare a string in C. The first is using our normal array definition. So we have this char C equals something like hello world, like this. And then what we could do is we can do things like printing out the string. So if I wanted to print out this string, I can use the formatted string %s, which is a string format. And then I just pass it a reference to C, the actual array itself. What C will do is it will take this array and it will print the whole thing onto the screen when I do this. Let's have a look and see what happens. So I can compile and run this, and you see I do indeed get the whole string printed onto the screen. Now, of course, this just being an array, we could work with it in the same way that we would any sort of array, right? I could do like indexing at a particular index, so I could look at C at 0. If I wanted to do this, I need to make sure to change this as well to a character. The reason being is because every single individual character in the string is, of course, a character. So we need to make sure that it's represented in the proper way. If we kept this as string, actually, we would get likely a segmentation fault, which means that C tried to read memory that is beyond the bounds of the actual array itself. That's typically what would happen if we try to print this as a string. So it's important to change this to a character when we're going for a single character. Now, when we do this, you see that we get just that single character. In this case, we printed the index at 0. If I move this to other locations in the array, I will, of course, get other values, right? So if I move it to index 2, I get L, which is the third character inside of the array. Now, this is all very basic, right? You've already seen arrays, so this is nice and simple. The more complicated part of string-based declarations is actually when we start to use pointers. So we can actually use a pointer like this to declare a string. This is the same sort of idea. We're basically getting an array of characters, with the main difference being that rather than having the whole array where we can index at particular elements, what we have instead is we have a pointer to the beginning of the array. And just to help demonstrate this, I could show you, if I were to dereference C and just print the value of C, what I will get is I will get the first character inside of this array, which is H. Let's take a look and see. You can see that we do indeed get that result. Now, we can still do a lot of the same things that we were doing before, right? So if I remove the pointer dereference and change this back to a string, what C will do is it will start at the beginning and print all the way to the end of the string. So I can show you that that actually is the case. We can see that it does print out the whole string. Now, just taking a brief little aside here, how does C know where the string ends? Well, what happens is when you declare a string, the very last memory slot, like just after the end of the string, gets this special character called a null terminator, which looks like this. This null terminator indicates the end of the string, and that's how C is able to print from beginning to end of the string, is using that null terminator character. So it doesn't show in the actual declaration, but if you look in memory, there is that null terminator, which tells us where the end of that string actually is located. And if you worked at lower level assembly, it's a very similar type of idea to, iterating through memory and trying to find the end of like an array of memory, for instance. It's just using that null terminator based idea. Now, there are other important things that we need to think about with these character pointers. We can, of course, reference particular elements inside of this string, right? So if I do $C, I get the first element. If I want to get the next element, as we've mentioned, we just increment it by 1, right? So it would give us the next element, which would be E. So let's go ahead and give that a try. To compile first and then run. And you see that I get E. I can increment by 2 and get L, and so on and so forth like that, right? So we can actually index particular elements inside of that array. Now, one final thing that's important to note about strings is that we actually have a library of string functions, which are very helpful. And that library is included using string.h. And what this library has, it has a variety of different functions for us to be able to use to work with strings. For example, suppose that you wanted to iterate through a whole string. How would you determine the length of the string? Well, we had some techniques of finding the length of a string, or length of an array rather, using the size of function. But another way that you can do it if you're working with strings is you can actually use this special built-in function called strlen, which will give you the length of a string. This is, of course, an integer value, so I want to change this to an integer. And now I can try running this. And you can see in this case, it's actually a long integer. It's LD. So let's change this to LD, as is similar with the other lengths that we've seen so far. So we'll change that to LD. compile, run, and you see get the answer 12. And if we take a look at this, we can see that it is indeed 12 characters long. So you can see that that's a way that we can actually get the length very easily, is using this built-in string length function. And there are other built-in functions that are available to us as well. I would invite you to explore through some of these different functions. There's things like ways of copying strings to each other. We could do concatenation using strcat. We can compare strings using strcmp. So there's a lot of very useful functions inside of the string comparison library. But generally, this should now give you a good overview of how you work with strings. So we have the character array, and then we have the pointer method, and we're able to use different functions through this string library, for instance, to be able to make our working with strings a little bit easier. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.